I remember vividly how my parents basically turned their backs on me when I was expecting my son, and my husband was diagnosed with lupus. They made it a point to say that neither he nor our baby was part of their family, which was painfully shocking to me since I was in a vulnerable state, and we all know how important family support can be at such a time. Then, in a bizarre twist, 3 years later, those same parents reappeared at my doorstep, wanting to step in and act like doting grandparents. The whole situation left me in disbelief. Their sudden decision to come back into our lives was both confusing and infuriating, because they had made their stance crystal clear once before, and it was a stance that broke my heart. 3 years back, I made the tough, but necessary decision to distance myself entirely from my parents, and the main reason was that it became more obvious than ever that my sister was their sole priority. Nothing else mattered to them, not me, not my husband, and not even their own grandson who was still an infant. Let me explain the history in more detail. It started when I was in my second trimester of pregnancy, and we found out that my husband had lupus. For quite some time, nearly a year, he had been suffering from unusual symptoms, so we kept going to the hospital, doing test after test, only to discover that his body was actually fighting itself. Learning that he had this autoimmune disease felt like the rug was pulled out from under us. We were about to become parents, and this diagnosis introduced a new layer of challenges we never expected. Naturally, at a moment like that, I turned to my parents for emotional and practical support. They originally told me that they would help with my pregnancy and later with the baby, once our child was born. On top of that, my in-laws had already stepped up as well, which was extremely comforting. However, the fact that my parents volunteered to pitch in was a big deal to me, because our relationship before then hadn't exactly been close or pleasant. We started to reconnect a bit after my sister moved away following her marriage 7 years ago, only because my parents found themselves somewhat lonely and realized I existed, too. Before she left, my sister was always in the spotlight, the proverbial golden child. I would be overlooked while they placed her on a pedestal. But once she moved out, she got busy with her new life and didn't really check in on them, so they seemed to turn to me. I thought this would finally be the bridge we needed to form a better bond. I really let myself hope that this would be a turning point, that maybe we could operate as a normal, supportive family for once. But those hopes were crushed the moment my sister returned 2 months after my baby boy was born. She announced she was divorcing her husband because he had been cheating on her. Immediately, my parents' attention went straight back to her, and I felt like an afterthought all over again. They basically forgot I existed, even though they had previously promised me that they would do whatever they could to help us take care of the baby. This was a crucial time for us, especially with my husband's health up in the air. His condition meant frequent hospital visits, and even on days we were at home, he was usually exhausted, often too tired to help as much as he might have wanted. And I understood that. It would have been unreasonable to expect him to function at full capacity. But my parents, who claimed they would be right there at my side, vanished into the background. It felt like being left out in the cold, and I became increasingly upset with them. Eventually, I confronted my parents, called them on the phone on a particularly rough day, and demanded to know why they hadn't lived up to their promise to support me. That phone call spiraled into a nasty argument. I was already brimming with frustration, so I pointed out all the ways they had neglected me in favor of my sister, not just now, but since childhood. They denied it, as if nobody else in the world could see it, when in fact, it was painfully obvious to everyone. Then the conversation took a turn for the worst. They lost their temper and admitted that they considered my sister to be far more important than me or my husband, or even my son. They had the audacity to say that my husband and child weren't their responsibility, or their family, whereas my sister definitely was. Hearing them blurt that out so bluntly felt like someone had stabbed me in the heart. That very moment was the tipping point. I couldn't process that kind of cruelty, so I slammed the phone down, blocked their number, and vowed never to speak to them again. And for 3 whole years, I stuck to that promise, carrying the pain from their words like a weight I couldn't put down. During those 3 years, it's not like my life was falling apart without their help. My in-laws proved themselves to be loving and supportive beyond anything I could have expected. They dropped by regularly to lighten my load, help with the baby, or bring meals when I was too tired to cook. We found a way to manage the ups and downs of my husband's condition. It would have been nice to have my parents care about me or their grandson, but it was clear they didn't, and it still stung to realize that. It was even more shocking to think they truly didn't see my child as family, and knowing their grandchild had been disregarded so easily angered me on a deep level. Yet, in the end, I was also thankful that I didn't have to rely on them, because relying on them would have meant leaning on people who didn't even consider my husband or my child to be part of their circle. 3 years went by. My husband's web development venture started booming last year, and it grew quickly enough that we could afford a full-time nurse for him. At the same time, I left my job to join him as a partner, so now we both run our own enterprise from our home offices. This setup has worked great for us. It's convenient, flexible, and fits our lifestyle well, especially when factoring in his health. Our son turned 3 recently, and right after his birthday, my parents showed up unannounced and uninvited, toting a pile of gifts they apparently thought would buy them a ticket back into our lives. I was genuinely stunned to see them at my door. After all that time, after everything that was said, they didn't even have the decency to address our fallout, or apologize for the hurtful words they had thrown around. Instead, they pretended that none of it had happened. It was jarring. They tried to act casual, telling me they were there to visit their grandson, hoping I would simply hand him over so they could suddenly be grandparents. I felt something inside me just flip. Their delusional behavior, as if the past 3 years never existed, was almost comical. I gave a bitter laugh and closed the door in their faces. As far as I was concerned, that was the end of the conversation. They were not going to play at being grandparents, after so blatantly stating that my child wasn't their responsibility. They kicked up a fuss outside my house, shouting loudly to get my attention, but I pretended not to hear. Eventually, they shuffled away. Naturally, my husband and his parents overheard the ruckus, but they let me settle down first before offering their thoughts. About half an hour after my parents left, my in-laws and my husband gently suggested that, if I ever found it in my heart, I might consider speaking to my parents at least once. They weren't pressuring me, they were just concerned that I was dealing with unresolved anger. They said that while I don't have to let my parents meet my son right now, maybe I might regret not even giving them the chance to explain themselves somewhere down the line. At least if I talked to them, I'd know I tried. If they messed up again, the fault would be on them, not me. It was sincere advice, and I appreciated it, because they were thinking about my emotional well-being. But frankly, I had no desire to face my parents, no will to open old wounds or, even worse, risk receiving more of their insults. I wasn't in the mood for drama, especially because the pattern with my parents was so hot and cold growing up. Plus, they didn't even apologize, they strolled up as if everything was fine. Even if they did apologize at some point, I would need a long time to see if they actually meant it, or if it was just a ploy to get access to my child. I fully believe I'm entitled to take my time and protect myself and my family. After everything they've put me through, I think I've earned the right to be cautious. However, there is this lingering concern in the back of my mind, maybe they won't be around forever, and if I don't give them a chance, I could regret it. That's what my husband and in-laws were getting at, and I know they make a fair point. So, I'm torn. I'm worried that ignoring them might weigh on me later, but I'm not prepared to open the door to them again. It's a tug-of-war in my heart. So, am I the bad guy for shutting them out now, after 3 years of zero contact? Not long after, I decided I should post an update on what was happening in my life. I thought deeply about all the feedback I'd heard, and let me just say I truly appreciate the time people took to respond. Ultimately, I realized I'm still not ready to engage with my parents in any meaningful way, especially because they have yet to offer me a real apology. They didn't even try the last time they showed up. They just pounded on my door and yelled about how we needed to clear the air. But one crucial phrase they never uttered was, "We're sorry," or any variation of it. And for me, that's the minimum requirement to even contemplate speaking to them again. I spent the last 3 years just fine without them. If they can't muster an apology, I can spend the next 3 years the same way. My husband and in-laws are understanding. There's no tension between us about this, they were just concerned. They'd never push me to do something I'm not emotionally prepared for. They're not trying to guilt trip me or twist my arm, they simply wanted me to know that, if I later felt differently, I shouldn't hesitate. But right now, Nothing has changed, and I see no reason to let people back into my life when they haven't even acknowledged the massive hurt they caused. Then something surprising happened. My sister reached out. Since I never actually blocked her, she was able to DM me on Instagram, saying she was in my part of town and wanted to meet up for lunch. We've never been particularly close. We never outright hated each other, but we had friction as teenagers, and as adults, we mostly kept to polite greetings on birthdays and holidays. Since the blow-up with my parents 3 years ago, we haven't spent any real time together. I was skeptical, but decided to agree to lunch, because her tone in the message seemed earnest. We ended up having a conversation that changed my perspective on several things. She started with small talk, giving me updates on her life. I learned that her divorce was finalized 2 years ago. She mentioned she had moved away from our parents a year after returning, found a house in the suburbs, and has been there ever since with her boyfriend. She then casually mentioned she got engaged last month, hasn't shared it publicly, but plans to soon. I congratulated her because, despite everything, I do know she truly loved her ex-husband and was deeply hurt to discover he'd been unfaithful. I was glad she could move on. Eventually, she addressed the elephant in the room, our parents. To my surprise, she wasn't defending them. She informed me that she's actually not on good terms with them right now, and that she apologized for the ways she might have contributed to my pain in the past. I was taken aback, because I couldn't recall any incident where she owed me a direct apology. My real conflict has always been with our parents, who blatantly favored her. But she explained that she'd been feeling guilty for how she never intervened, never tried to level the playing field, even though it was clear our parents put her on a pedestal. She even admitted that she was well aware of their bias. She believed she should have stood up for me at various points in our upbringing, but she never did. I told her honestly that I didn't hold her responsible. This was primarily our parents' behavior, not hers. She went on to share that she's been fighting with them lately because of 2 main issues. First, they think it's too soon for her to get married again. They are fretting over how people will judge her for remarrying so quickly after her divorce. My sister doesn't care about that judgment, because her previous marriage had been emotionally over for quite some time before the official divorce. She explained she had already fallen out of love before discovering the affair. So for her, moving on doesn't feel rushed at all. The second, even bigger issue, is that she's decided she doesn't want children, ever. Apparently, our mother tried to argue that at least if she remarries, maybe there will be grandchildren in the near future, especially since she's in her early 30s. But my sister had to set them straight and declare that she plans to remain child-free. This has enraged our parents. They've been fighting bitterly, with them insisting she should have kids and her standing firm in her decision not to. She broke down in tears when telling me about it, which really got to me, because here was the sister I'd always seen as the golden child, now sounding completely trapped and miserable by our parents' expectations. She confessed that her life wasn't as perfect as I'd assumed. She stayed in her first marriage longer than she wanted because our parents kept pushing her not to divorce, claiming that having a child might magically fix a clearly toxic relationship. She was living under their thumb, trying desperately not to disappoint them at every turn. She even chose her college major based on their preferences rather than her own. Hearing all this made me realize our parents had used her just as they had used me, though in different ways. They pitted us against each other, giving her favoritism while simultaneously suffocating her with impossible standards. I felt an overwhelming surge of compassion for her, an urge to help her, and let go of whatever petty sibling rivalry I might have harbored. I told her that she deserved to live freely, to make her own choices, and that she should never again try to bend to our parents' will when it comes to massive life decisions like marriage and children. It made me furious that our parents treated us both so poorly, me as disposable and her as a puppet. I shared with her how our parents had turned up at my door a few days before, acting like everything was normal and wanting to meet my son. And then we realized the timing was far too suspicious. They had likely just learned that my sister wouldn't be giving them the grandkids they wanted, so they decided to circle back to me and my son, hoping to finally fulfill their craving to be grandparents. My sister was horrified by that. She insisted I was right in shutting them out, because my boy isn't a backup plan or someone they get to treat as a second option. She was enraged on my behalf, and so was I. After hearing her side of the story, it became crystal clear that our parents' motives were disingenuous. If they had truly been sorry, they would have said so and acted differently. From that day forward, my sister and I have stayed in close communication, and I have to say it feels good to reconnect after all this time of keeping each other at arm's length. Once I explained the entire situation to my husband and in-laws, they were appalled by my parents' blatant manipulation. Even though, at first, my in-laws had gently suggested I give my parents a chance, now they completely understood and supported my decision to keep them away. It's still baffling to realize just how self-centered my parents are, and how far they are willing to go to get what they want. A little more time passed, and then our parents tried to contact both of us again, this time via email, because we had blocked them everywhere else. The tone of their message was condescending, like they were addressing disobedient children, who should be grateful for their attention. My sister and I both had the same reaction. We replied telling them we'd prefer if they stayed away, and then we blocked them on email as well. The fact is, they were never good parents. We tried for so long to earn their approval and love, but they never gave us genuine respect or support. Now neither my sister nor I have any desire to keep playing that game. We made that perfectly clear in our response to their email, and shut down any further attempts on their part. Fast forward a bit, and my sister recently got married. It was a small, intimate ceremony, and I was thrilled to be there as a bridesmaid. Watching her walk down the aisle with a new sense of freedom and happiness was priceless. Her new spouse seems like a wonderful, laid-back individual, and they seem completely in tune with each other's needs, which is something she never had in her previous marriage. Meanwhile, our parents remain uninvited and firmly cut out of both of our lives. Honestly, the wedding was such a joyful celebration that it drove home how unnecessary my parents' negative opinions were. They missed out on a day filled with love, because they are too fixated on controlling every aspect of their daughters' lives. That's entirely their loss. Some months after my sister and I told our parents to leave us alone, they emailed us again, claiming they were cutting us out of their will and leaving everything to charity, because we were ungrateful brats. It was a bizarre attempt to get some kind of reaction. They must have hoped we'd come crawling back in fear of losing an inheritance. Obviously, that didn't happen. My sister and I didn't budge. I have my own thriving life with my husband, our son, and my amazing in-laws, people who truly love and value us. She now has a solid relationship with her new husband, free from our parents' excessive demands. If our mother and father want to brood in bitterness, that's their business, not mine. They made their bed long ago, and now they can lie in it, alone. And that's the complete story, with every detail fully preserved, but shared in even greater depth. I haven't deleted or censored anything, just given you the whole experience, exactly how it felt, exactly how it went down, and expanded on the emotional layers that shaped it all.